Welcome to True Crime Case Files, where we delve into some of the most shocking and tragic crimes across America. Today, we're traveling to Boulder, Colorado, a town known for its liberal politics and scenic beauty. But in early June 2017, this serene setting became the backdrop for a horrific crime, a tragic murder that would shatter the lives of everyone involved. This is the story of a twisted love affair that ended in a murder you have to see to believe. Paul Barstow, a 36-year-old from Boulder, Colorado, he was a man who had found balance between his professional and personal life. He worked as a software engineer, a field where he was highly respected for his skills and reliability. His work was his passion, and he often spoke of his dream to develop a groundbreaking app called Lehman, named after the groundbreaking woman's writer, that would change how people interacted sexually with technology. When he wasn't at his desk, Paul was an artist. He loved to paint landscapes, often drawing inspiration from the scenic views around Boulder, nestled at the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Paul was a devoted father to his 2 young children from a previous marriage. Despite the challenges of being a single parent, he always made time for them. Paul's friends described him as calm, thoughtful, and dependable. He was the kind of person who stuck to routines, finding comfort in the predictability of his day-to-day life. In the days leading up to his death, Paul's life seemed normal on the surface, but those close to him noticed that he was increasingly troubled. His relationship with Angelica Barstow, his sister-in-law, had always been complicated. 5 years ago, they had started an affair in secret, which gave him a release from the pressures of his life, but it also filled him with guilt and unease. Paul was particularly concerned about the closeness Angelica continued to share with her husband, Jason, who ironically was also Paul's younger brother. Paul had been looking forward to a weekend trip he had planned with his children. He had rented a cabin near Est Park, hoping to spend some quality time away from the complications at home. He talked about visiting the Stanley Hotel, famous for inspiring Stephen King's The Shining, and maybe taking his kids on a ghost tour. But Paul would never make it to that trip. His life, filled with dreams of innovation and a love for nature, was about to come to a sudden, tragic end. On the night of June 5, 2017, Boulder was calm, with a soft breeze rustling through the trees. The city was settling into the warmth of summer, and most people were relaxing in their homes. At around 10:30 p.m., Jason Barstow, Paul's younger brother, arrived at Paul's house. He had been trying to reach Paul all day, but his calls and texts went unanswered for several days. Jason, known for his laid-back attitude, initially thought his brother might be out hiking or simply busy with the kids. But as the hours passed, he grew increasingly worried. When Jason arrived, he found the front door slightly ajar, which was unusual for Paul, who was always careful about home security. Jason hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open and stepping inside. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound being the ticking of a wall clock. Jason called out Paul's name, but there was no response. As he moved further into the house, Jason noticed signs of a struggle in the living room. An overturned chair, scattered papers, and a coffee mug shattered on the floor. His heart raced as he made his way to the bedroom. It was there that he discovered Paul's lifeless body, lying on the floor near the bed. Paul's face was pale, and a length of rope was still wrapped tightly around his neck. The sight was so shocking that Jason froze, unable to process what he was seeing. For a few moments, Jason stood there in disbelief, trying to make sense of the scene before him. His brother, always so full of life, now lay motionless. After what felt like an eternity, Jason managed to pull out his phone and then dial 911. His voice trembled as he told the operator what he had found, barely able to get the words out. The dispatcher instructed him to wait outside until the police arrived. Jason stumbled out of the house, his mind racing. He sat on the front steps, staring blankly at the street, trying to hold back tears. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air as Boulder police arrived on the scene. Neighbors peeked out from their windows, drawn by the flashing lights, but Jason couldn't bring himself to look at anyone. His world had just been shattered, and all he could do was wait for the nightmare to unfold further. The Boulder police arrived quickly at Paul Barstow's home on the night of June 5, 2017. The flashing lights and sirens cut through the quiet neighborhood, alerting nearby residents that something terrible had happened. Detective Laura Reynolds, a seasoned investigator with 15 years of experience, was the first on the scene. Known for her no-nonsense approach and sharp instincts, Reynolds immediately sensed that this was no ordinary death. As she entered the house, Reynolds took in the disarray. The living room looked like it had been the site of a struggle. An overturned chair, scattered papers, and a shattered coffee mug painted a picture of chaos, but it was the scene in the bedroom that confirmed her worst fears. Paul Barstow lay on the floor, a length of rope still tightly wound around his neck. His face was pale, his eyes lifeless. The sight was disturbing, even for someone as experienced as Reynolds. The crime scene team quickly set to work, photographing the room from every angle and collecting potential evidence. They dusted for fingerprints, took samples from the rope, and carefully bagged the shattered pieces of the coffee mug. Reynolds noticed the position of Paul's body. His hands bore defensive wounds, and there were signs of bruising around his neck and face. To her, this clearly pointed to a violent struggle, suggesting that Paul had fought for his life. However, not everyone on the team was convinced. As the investigation progressed, a controversy began to brew. Some forensic experts argued that the scene could be interpreted differently. Dr. Matilda Chiang, a forensic pathologist with a reputation for thoroughness, suggested that the evidence might point to a suicide rather than a murder. She noted that the rope had been tied in a way that could be self-inflicted, and the disarray in the living room could have been caused by Paul in a distressed state. According to Dr. Chiang, it wasn't uncommon for people in deep emotional turmoil to stage scenes before taking their own lives. This conflict between several different experts created tension within the investigation. On one side, Detective Reynolds and her team were convinced that Paul had been murdered, possibly during a violent struggle. On the other side, Dr. Chiang and her supporters argued for a more nuanced interpretation, one that considered the possibility of suicide. The disagreement slowed the investigation, as the team was forced to consider both possibilities, examining every piece of evidence from multiple angles. As the days passed, the pressure on the Boulder Police Department grew. The media caught wind of the conflicting theories, with local outlets like the Denver Post, a newspaper renowned for its hard-hitting investigations, running stories that questioned whether the police were pursuing the right leads. The controversy only added to the anguish of Paul's family, who were desperate for answers. They wanted to know what had really happened to the man they loved, and they demanded that the police uncover the truth, whether it pointed to murder or suicide. Angelica Barstow, Paul's sister-in-law, quickly became the first person of interest in the investigation. At 34, Angelica was known in Boulder for her quirky personality. She ran a YouTube channel with almost 100,000 subscribers called Fairy Works, where she posted videos about her interactions with fairies and other spiritual beings. The channel had gained quite a lot of attention, including from newspapers and some online outlets, but mostly for the wrong reasons. Viewers attacked her by the thousands, leaking hateful comments saying everything she was talking about was fake and that she was a liar. And by June 2017, the negativity had begun to take its toll on Angelica's mental health. Angelica's marriage to Jason Barstow, Paul's younger brother, had been rocky for years. Friends and neighbors had noticed their frequent public arguments, with Angelica often seen viciously berating Jason. On one occasion, she even forced him to strip in public and humiliate himself, yelling at him to declare that he was a loser. These incidents painted a picture of a woman on the verge of a nervous breakdown. The police were aware of these issues as they began their investigation. Detective Laura Reynolds, leading the case, focused on Angelica's possible motive. It was no secret that Angelica had felt trapped in her marriage, and her affair with Paul had provided her with an escape. The affair had been passionate and secretive, with several sexually explicit texts between Angelica and Paul found on Paul's phone. But as Paul began to pull away, possibly due to the increasing tension and fear in his life, Angelica's feelings of desperation and betrayal might have deepened. During her interrogation, Angelica was calm, almost detached. She admitted to the affair, but insisted that she had nothing to do with Paul's death. "The fairies told me he was pulling away," she told Detective Reynolds. "But Lady Luna Lovegoated as my witness, I would never hurt him. I loved him." However, her demeanor struck Reynolds as strange, too composed, given the circumstances. The detective noticed how Angelica's eyes darted around the room whenever she was asked about her relationship with Paul, as if searching for an answer. As the questioning continued, Angelica began to display signs of agitation. She denied any involvement in Paul's death, but couldn't explain where she had been on the night of the murder. Her alibi was vague, and when pressed for details, she became defensive. "I don't have to tell you everything, the fairies will." She snapped at one point, her voice rising. The police took note of her behavior, which only fueled their suspicions. Despite her denials, the evidence against Angelica was circumstantial at best. The texts showed that the affair was real, but they didn't prove that she had murdered Paul. Still, her unstable behavior and the tension in her marriage made her a prime suspect. As the investigation continued, Detective Reynolds and her team kept a close eye on Angelica, waiting for any slip-up that might reveal more about her involvement in Paul's death. Next on the list of suspects was Jason Barstow, Paul's younger brother and Angelica's husband. Jason, 29, was known around Boulder as a charming but aimless man. He had drifted from job to job, never quite finding his footing. His easygoing attitude made him well-liked, but it also led to frequent clashes with Angelica, who was frustrated by his lack of ambition. Jason's relationship with Paul was strained, not just because of his affair with Angelica, but also due to the deep-seated envy he harbored for his older brother's success and stability. The police were aware of this sibling rivalry as they began questioning Jason. Detective Laura Reynolds, who was leading the investigation, found Jason to be cooperative but visibly nervous. When asked about his whereabouts on the night of Paul's death, Jason claimed he had been at a local bar, The Sink, watching the Rockies game and chatting with some friends. However, when the police checked his alibi, it didn't hold up. The bartender didn't remember seeing Jason that night, and none of the regulars could confirm his presence either. Jason's inconsistencies made the police suspicious, but there was more to consider. The tension in his marriage to Angelica had been no secret. Friends had noticed how Jason often tried to avoid confrontations with his wife, retreating into his easygoing nature whenever things got heated. But beneath his laid-back exterior there was a man who had grown increasingly resentful of his brother's long-term affair with Angelica. Paul had everything Jason wanted: a successful career, a stable life, and for a while, a sexual relationship with Jason's own wife. During his interrogation, Jason tried to downplay the affair's impact on him. "Yeah, I was mad," he admitted to Detective Reynolds. But then he said he wasn't going to do anything about it since Paul was his brother, and while had our differences, he would never hurt Paul. His voice was steady, but Reynolds noted the way Jason's hands fidgeted constantly, a sign of his unease. The police pressed Jason about his relationship with Angelica, particularly the public arguments that had been witnessed by neighbors. Jason shrugged them off, saying, "Angelica's got a temper, but it's nothing serious. We argue, then we bleep each other until we faint. But who doesn't?" Still, his attempts to downplay the tension didn't convince the detectives. There was something off about the way he avoided eye contact when asked about the night of Paul's murder. Despite the inconsistencies in his story, there was no concrete evidence linking Jason to the crime. His motive, anger and jealousy, was clear, but without more solid proof, the police couldn't pin the murder on him. Nevertheless, Jason remained under close scrutiny as the investigation continued, his every move watched by Detective Reynolds and her team. The final suspect under investigation was Linda Barstow, Paul's ex-wife. At 48 years old, Linda was known for her fiercely protective nature, especially when it came to her two children. Bored and Salter, and her controlling tendencies had caused friction within the extended Barstow family for years. Linda and Paul had divorced amicably on the surface, but those close to the family knew there was lingering tension. Despite their split, Linda had never fully let go of her influence over Paul's life, often meddling in his personal affairs and showing up unannounced at his home. Linda's involvement in Paul's life after the divorce had always been a sore point, especially because she had a history of favoring Paul's younger brother Jason. This blatant favoritism had always caused resentment between the brothers, but Linda seemed indifferent to the effect it had on their relationship. In fact, she had been especially close to Jason, even going so far as to engage in a brief affair with him when he was barely 18 years old. This past sexual interlude was a poorly kept secret, and it added an uncomfortable layer to the family dynamics. When the police brought Linda in for questioning, she was composed but defensive. Detective Laura Reynolds led the interrogation, asking about Linda's relationship with Paul in the months leading up to his death. Linda insisted that she had moved on from their marriage and that their relationship was strictly about co-parenting. "I was over the bleep a long time ago," she stated firmly. "Our focus was on Board and Salter, nothing more." But Detective Reynolds wasn't convinced. Linda had a history of interfering in Paul's life, and there were rumors that she disapproved of his affair with Angelica. Friends of Linda's mentioned to the police that she had spoken openly about her disdain for Angelica, whom she considered unfit to be part of the family. Linda quickly pointed the finger at Angelica when she heard about Paul's death, telling detectives that she had always suspected Angelica was trouble. During her interrogation, Linda maintained her innocence but couldn't hide her animosity toward Angelica. She was never good enough for Paul, and I told him that, Linda confessed. I didn't want the bleeping bleep anywhere near my bleeping kids. Despite her strong feelings, Linda denied any involvement in Paul's death, insisting that she would never harm him, especially because of the impact it would have on their children. The police were left with a puzzle. Linda had motive, protectiveness over her children and resentment toward Angelica. But like Jason, there was no hard evidence linking her to the crime. Her strong personality and controlling nature made her a person of interest, but without more concrete proof, the detectives couldn't proceed with an arrest. The investigation continued as they sought the truth behind Paul's tragic deaths. On July 12, 2017, just when the investigation seemed to be hitting a dead end, a new piece of evidence emerged that changed everything. That morning, the weather was warm and sunny, typical for Boulder in early summer. A neighbor was walking her dog named Mary Sinclair Varlets when she noticed something unusual in the Barstow's trash can, which had been left out by the curb. Being a bit nosy by nature, she peeked inside and saw what appeared to be a torn piece of fabric stained with blood. Disturbed by the sight, she immediately called the police. Detective Laura Reynolds and her team arrived quickly on the scene. They retrieved the fabric, which was identified as a piece of shirt, frayed at the ends, and soaked in what was confirmed to be Paul Barstow's blood. This discovery was significant. It directly contradicted the suicide theory and pointed to a violent struggle. The shirt matched the DNA found around Paul's neck, making it a key piece of evidence in the investigation. Forensic experts were called in to analyze the rope and the bloodstains further. They also scored the Barstow's trash can for any other clues, finding nothing else of immediate interest. However, the presence of the rope was enough to reignite the investigation. Detective Reynolds felt a renewed sense of urgency. This changes everything, she felt. With the new evidence in hand, the detectives revisited their list of suspects. The T-shirt piece was likely discarded in a hurry, possibly by someone who had access to the Barstow home. The timing of the trash being taken out suggested that the killer was close to the family and knew their routines well. The team knew they had to re-interview the suspects, focusing on their whereabouts in the days after Paul's death, and any potential connection to the rope. The discovery of the bloodied T-shirt piece marked a turning point in the investigation. It provided the detectives with the crucial evidence they needed to rule out suicide definitively and focus their efforts on finding the killer. The search for justice for Paul Barstow was far from over, but now the police had a new lead that could finally bring the truth to light. On July 15, 2017, Detective Laura Reynolds and her team made a breakthrough in the investigation. After weeks of questioning and collecting evidence, they identified Angelica Barstow as the prime suspect in Paul Barstow's murder. Angelica, 34, was Paul's sister-in-law and had been in a secret 5-year-long affair with him. Her strange behavior, including her obsession with fairies on her YouTube channel and the emotional turmoil she exhibited, had raised suspicions among the detectives. Angelica's alibi had fallen apart. Initially, she claimed she was at home with her children on the night of Paul's murder, but neighbors reported seeing her Chevy Malibu parked near Paul's house around the time of the crime. Moreover, Angelica's erratic behavior and emotional outbursts have been noted by several people, including her friends and family. Her YouTube channel, Fairy Works, where she talked about fairies as if they were real, had also gained a reputation for its bizarre content, which seemed to reflect her unstable mental state. On the morning of June 15, detectives arrived at Angelica's home to execute an arrest warrant. Angelica was found at her kitchen table, looking disheveled and anxious, wearing just a bra and nothing else. When the police explained that she was being arrested for Paul's murder, Angelica reacted with shock. Her face went pale, and she began to cry. "I didn't do it," she sobbed. "The fairies made me do it." Her claims about fairies seemed out of place and further raised doubts about her mental condition. Angelica was taken into custody, and the police conducted a thorough search of her home. They found more evidence linking her to the crime, including personal items belonging to Paul and additional pieces of rope that matched the one found in the trash. As the detectives interviewed her, Angelica continued to insist that she had been manipulated by fairies, a claim that seems somewhat irrational. During her arrest, Angelica appeared bewildered and frightened, unable to comprehend the seriousness of the situation. Her emotional outbursts and strange explanations only deepened the police's belief that she was involved in the murder. Detective Reynolds described the arrest as a crucial step in solving the case. The arrest of Angelica Barstow sent shock waves through Boulder. The community was stunned to learn that the seemingly devoted mother and wife could be involved in such a heinous crime. As the investigation moved forward, the focus shifted to understanding Angelica's motive and mental state. As the details of her involvement in Paul's murder continued to unfold, the trial of Angelica Barstow began on August 7, 2018, in Boulder County Court. The courtroom was filled with tension as people gathered to see justice for Paul Barstow. The case had attracted some media attention, with local news outlets closely covering each development. Angelica's trial was marked by intense emotions and dramatic courtroom moments. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Rachel Stone, argued that Angelica had planned and carried out Paul's murder. Stone, a 42-year-old attorney known for her tough stance on violent crimes, painted a clear picture of Angelica's motive. Stone argued Angelica's jealousy and unstable mental state led her to commit the horrific act of murdering her brother-in-law/lover. She highlighted Angelica's affair with Paul and her erratic behavior, including her bizarre claims about fairies manipulating her actions. The defense, represented by 50-year-old attorney Harold Green, took a different approach. Green argued that Angelica was suffering from severe mental illness and was not fully responsible for her actions. Green told the court that Angelica was in the grip of a psychological breakdown. He presented evidence of Angelica's ongoing struggles with mental health, including her obsession with fairies and her unstable behavior, suggesting that she was not in her right mind when the crime occurred. During the trial, Paul's family attended each day, their faces itched with sorrow. They watched as details of Paul's murder were laid bare, including the evidence of the bloody rope and Angelica's troubled past. The emotional toll on the family was evident as they heard about the affair and Angelica's claims about fairies. After several days of testimony and closing arguments, the jury deliberated and reached a verdict on August 14, 2018. Angelica Barstow was found guilty of first-degree murder. The jury's decision was met with a mix of relief and sadness from Paul's family, who felt that justice had been served, but were still grieving their loss. On August 21, 2018, Angelica was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge's decision was a reflection of the severity of her crime and the impact on Paul's family. The verdict was seen as a fair punishment by many, though some argued it was too harsh, given Angelica's mental health issues. For Paul's family and friends, the trial and sentencing brought a sense of closure but could not undo the pain of their loss. The case remained a tragic reminder of how complex and devastating personal relationships can be. After Angelica Barstow's conviction and sentencing, life in Boulder began to shift back to normal, though the impact of the case lingered for many involved. Angelica Barstow was transferred to the Colorado Department of Corrections, where she would serve her life sentence without the possibility of parole. Her life in prison was marked by ongoing psychological evaluations to address her mental health issues. While her exact location within the prison system was not publicized for security reasons, it was known that she received regular counseling and medical care. Her claims about being influenced by fairies remained a topic of discussion, both among inmates and in media reports. Jason Barstow, Angelica's husband, faced a tough road ahead. But 29-year-old had to rebuild his life. He continued to work on his personal and professional life, trying to provide stability for his family amid the upheaval. His reputation was affected by the scandal, and he struggled to find steady employment in Boulder, a city that had followed the case closely. Linda Barstow, Paul's ex-wife, also dealt with the aftermath of the trial. Her relationship with Paul's family was strained, and her public criticism of Angelica had made her a controversial figure. Linda continued to be active in community affairs but faced criticism for her involvement in the case. She focused on her career and personal life while navigating the fallout from the trial. Paul Barstow's family, including his 2 young children, found some measure of closure with the trial's conclusion. They received counseling to help them cope with their loss and the public nature of the case. They continued to honor Paul's memory through private gatherings and by sharing stories of his life and work. The Boulder community also rallied around them, offering support and sympathy as they moved forward. In summary, the aftermath of the trial saw significant changes in the lives of those involved. The case left a lasting impact on Boulder, with the community reflecting on the complexities of personal relationships and mental health. While Angelica Barstow faced the consequences of her actions, those affected by the case worked to rebuild their lives and find a sense of normalcy.